Hi, I'm Sara Ines Calderon,
And I'm Adriana Maestas.
and this is your Latino Political Roundup. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. I know it's been a while since we had our last video, but here we are again this week.
Yeah, we were a little caught up with the holidays and some travel.
Definitely. But we wanted to make sure that you checked out our channel. Please subscribe, like this video, share it on Facebook, tweet it, leave us your comments, and always feel free to follow us on Twitter. I'm Sara Chicadi.
I'm at Latino Politics.
And engage us in that platform too. So this week we had some interesting stuff happen since the last time we've published a video.
Definitely. So this past week, unemployment numbers came out again. What was interesting about that is Latino unemployment remained at 10%. So nationally, we've seen overall unemployment has continued to trend downwards. It is now for the country, we're at 7.7%, which is down 0.2% since October. Latino unemployment hasn't budged since October. It was 10% then, it's 10% now. Basically, this has to do with losses in construction and manufacturing industry. So it's going to sort of be interesting to see as the numbers for December come in, which they will in early January, and as things pick up in the new year, where Latino unemployment will go. Especially since so many Latinos supported President Obama and the Democrats. So
Yeah,
it'll be something. It'll be something that a lot of people are going to keep their eye on.
definitely.
So, and then along with that, there were a few stories about this. We have one that was a reprint from Voxy on Politic 365, and also there was one in Politico, and I think that it might have appeared a few other places. Is basically there is going to be new energy and momentum in Latino politics post-election. And this sort of comes from the energy that was created with Eva Longoria, who was the Obama campaign co-chair, and some of her colleagues who are similarly resourced. They plan to inject some money into the political process and to sort of advance the Latino political agenda. And worth noting with that is in the election, Eva and her cohort of similar Latino Obama supporters raised over $30 million.
Wow, $30 million.
So they're planning to sort of use this money to propel immigration reform and other things that the community is looking for.
Wow. Did they raise it like through an organization or through a PAC or something?
Well, they did have I don't know if this is like a PAC off the top of my head, but it was a fundraising arm called the Futuro Fund.
Oh, the Futuro Fund. Okay.
Which I'm assuming, I think that is a PAC, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So how this sort of takes shape.
That'll be really interesting to see because I think a lot of the time when we've had this immigration, conversation, it's been around politicians. But as we saw in this last cycle, especially with all of the super PAC money, you can create a conversation around topics and around issues that doesn't necessarily involve political personalities. And that can be organic and that can be, part of a community or a national discussion without necessarily having to revolve around elected officials. So that'll be really interesting to see how they use that money.
Yeah, and the other thing to watch for too is sort of how this group of money people, how it might compete with some of the traditional Latino organizations, and whether some of the establishment organizations feel that this might be encroaching on their turf or whether they welcome it. The extent that they work in concert with each other is going to be something to watch.
That will be very interesting. I mean, and I think it's especially pertinent considering the fact that the New York Times, a lot of people read this story with great interest, that Latino students that make up a quarter of publicly enrolled, school children in the United States never see themselves represented in books that they read in these public schools. I think they did a study that said that less than 3% of books written by or about Latinos of the, however many thousands were published during the course of the study. But I mean, I think that what was really interesting, as a point that you brought up, is not only is this detrimental to, Latino students who grew up reading about all these other people doing all these other things, and no Latinos doing anything, right? But what about all of the non-Latino students who are also growing up not reading about any Latinos in their literature doing anything? Or and then I think a bigger issue here, and this is something that a friend of mine brought up in a conversation we were having about this particular story, is it kind of seems to make it more about the publishing industry, the story, that there was like some sort of deficit within the publishing industry, and that's why we were seeing this issue. But I think that obviously this issue is tied to the same things the same phenomena we see in education and politics and healthcare and unemployment. Latinos are bearing the brunt of all kinds of, socioeconomic considerations that also contribute to the fact that they're not represented in children's literature. So that was a pretty interesting story. I definitely recommend that y'all check that out, because it plays upon how we, from a very young age, are starting to shape our opinions on issues like immigration or the economy, for example.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think that being able to have characters that you can relate to is important. But I mean, I don't think it's like the only factor in success. I mean,
No, definitely not.
Yeah, no, not in student achievement or anything like that. But I mean, it would be nice, or it would be. You would think they would be a little bit more comforting, or just a little bit more familiar for students to be able to know that, okay, there are some characters who are kind of like me. They might not like have the exact same experience, but maybe they celebrate some of the traditions I do in the stories, and that is important. I know, like when I was a kid, I read quite a bit, and I don't think I really encountered any Latino characters until my dad gave me a Rodolfo Anaya book.
That's mi última.
Yeah, exactly. And even though it's like I didn't have that rural upbringing, I knew that the stories in that book were very similar to, like, I think even stories my father would tell me.
Definitely.
So it's not, that it was a little connection, and it was nice to read it. And I know that that's like a favorite book of a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. So, another really interesting thing that happened this week, and something you're going to talk to us about, is kind of the continuation of the Republicans, 180 on immigration reform.
Yeah. So basically, this week, George W. Bush, former president, he made his second major policy speech since leaving office in Dallas. He's on his home turf. And he basically made this nice appeal for immigration reform. And he said, not only do immigrants help our economy, they invigorate our soul.
Wow.
Yeah, so he got a little...
Too bad he didn't say that when he was president, because then it would have held some weight.
Well, you know what? To his credit, he was supportive of comprehensive immigration reform.
Pre-9/11, yeah.
Well, also, too, I think he was supportive of the McCain-Kennedy. I mean, he, at least from what I read, wanted to see that happen. So... with that, George W. Bush, he was making sort of the economic argument for immigration, talking about how they fill gaps in the labor market and how they contribute to the economy. This sort of thing, I think we're going to see and hear more of from actual policy people on the right. Like George W. Bush, not so much sort of the statements of Ann Coulter, which I think caused a stir towards the end of the week.
That was unfortunate.
Yeah. So I think that you're going to see more people step up and talking about immigration reform.
Let's hope so. Let's definitely. Let's hope so. Let's hope that people from both sides of the aisle can get together on that. One of the other interesting things that happened this week, and this is kind of not totally related to Latino politics, but I think it's really relevant. So for folks who might not know, MALDEF had to sue Los Angeles County Sheriff Lee Baca to release the full records from the Rubén Salazar case. Rubén Salazar was a reporter for KMEX, I think, was a TV station at the time, but he also wrote for the LA Times. He was basically like the voice of Latinos in LA during the tumultuous 1960s, and then during the Chicano moratorium on let's see, I wrote this down, on August 29th in 1970, he was hit in the head with a tear gas canister when sheriff's deputies fired into a bar
Yeah.
filled with people. And it was always a little bit suspicious, that whether they killed him on purpose or, things just weren't matching up. And so they finally released those files. And so that's really exciting. I'm trying to see how I can get a look at them. But that was a big deal. Another thing that was a big deal and like similarly escandaloso that happened this week, that we had a really great writer on Politic 365 kind of highlight the issue.
Yeah, and this was Jean Vidal. He writes from Puerto Rico.
Yeah, and he wrote a story about this. I guess he kind of characterized this not so much being like political commentary, but kind of like a gossipy show that kind of doesn't really, it's detrimental to like the larger political discussion in Puerto Rico. But it's called La Comay, which is like a puppet that I guess kind of has like homophobic tendencies generally, but they kind of cross the line when they, characterized someone who was brutally murdered, and kind of insinuating all these sexual tendencies that the victim may have had, when in fact Puerto Rico is experiencing like a terrible escalation in violence, amongst other problems. So there was this like really interesting social media backlash that has culminated in a bunch of advertisers pulling their money from the show. So it was like a really interesting coup for social media in Puerto Rico.
Exactly. It was just sort of another story that shows the power of social media with Latinos.
Yeah.
And even people here on the mainland caught wind of it and learned about it because of the big social media push.
And it's really interesting that that's happening in Puerto Rico right now, because obviously they had this like big referendum on status or on statehood recently, and you were bringing up the fact that the governor is pushing to have a special legislative session to bring that issue, to further the issue. I mean, so it'll be really interesting to see how, all of these, issues in tandem, the statehood and, the violence and the, play out on social media.
Yeah.
Given the way that we've seen it with La Comay. So.
Yeah, La Comay. But the thing with Puerto Rico, too, to watch is we're kind of at the point where it's up to Congress to act. So it'll be something to watch for, to see how this current Congress addresses that issue. So hopefully on Politic 365 and in other outlets, there'll be some analysis on that.
Definitely. I'm sure that there will be. So, but thank you so much for joining us for another episode of our Latino Political Analysis. I'm Sara Inés Calderon.
I'm Adriana Maestas.
And you have a great week. Don't forget to favorite, share on Facebook, like, comment.
Send us tips,
and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next video. So thanks. Bye.
Thank you.